For thousands of years, our ancestors knew only the solid embrace of the earth. They trusted the dirt, the rocks, and the deep roots beneath their calloused feet. The land was their entire universe, offering both shelter and familiar peril. But one day, a desperate tribe reached the absolute edge of their known reality. The dense forest abruptly opened up to a desolate landscape of blinding white sand. And beyond that sand lay an impossible, terrifying expanse of moving blue. They dropped to their knees, paralyzed by the sheer scale of the endless abyss. This was not a river, nor a lake, but a roaring monster that swallowed the horizon. The sheer volume of water defied everything their primitive minds could comprehend. A cold, salty wind whipped against their faces, carrying the scent of alien decay. The rhythmic crashing of the waves sounded like the breathing of a colossal beast. To them, the ocean was not a place of wonder, but a wall of absolute death. They watched the tide pull back, revealing strange creatures stranded in the mud. Then the water surged forward again, hungry and relentless, devouring the shoreline. Those who dared to taste the sparkling water violently choked on its bitter salt. It was a cruel illusion, an ocean of liquid that could not quench their burning thirst. The tribe huddled together around their fires, keeping their backs to the dark water. In the dead of night, the roaring surf sounded like a chorus of angry spirits. They were trapped between the starving predators of the forest and the edge of the world. Days turned into agonizing weeks as their meager food supplies began to dwindle. The hunters scoured the sparse coastline, finding nothing but broken shells and dry bones. Despair settled over the camp like a heavy, suffocating blanket of fog. They could not go back into the hostile woods, and they could not walk on water. The boundary of their existence seemed final, a cruel trap set by nature itself. They stared at the watery expanse, feeling completely devoid of any possible escape. Yet, the human mind is uniquely wired to seek impossible solutions in the face of death. Among them was a man who spent hours staring into the churning, violent waves. He did not look at the water with mere terror, but with a silent, desperate curiosity. He noticed how the massive corpses of dead trees floated effortlessly on the surface. The heavy wood, which sank in the mud, danced upon the crests of the giant waves. He watched seabirds land on these drifting logs, using them as islands of rest. A radical, terrifying thought began to take shape in the darkness of his mind. If the water could hold the weight of the massive tree, perhaps it could hold him. To a modern mind, stepping onto a log seems like a simple, logical deduction. But for an ancient human, abandoning solid ground was an act of profound insanity. It defied every survival instinct forged over millions of years of primate evolution. To leave the earth was to willingly step into the jaws of the unknown abyss. The man approached a massive, sun-bleached trunk resting near the roaring surf. The rest of the tribe gathered around him, their eyes wide with confusion and dread. They whispered warnings, pulling at his furs, begging him not to anger the water spirits. But starvation had already hollowed out his cheeks, leaving him with nothing to lose. With a primal grunt, he placed his calloused hands against the rough, dry bark. He pushed with all his remaining strength, his muscles screaming against the weight. The log groaned against the sand, resisting his efforts like a stubborn beast. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, the massive timber slid toward the churning foam. The cold seawater washed over his feet, sending a violent shiver up his spine. The ocean seemed to awaken, wrapping its icy fingers around the dead wood. Suddenly, the log shifted, no longer bound by the friction of the earth. It bobbed violently in the surf, threatening to crush him beneath its immense weight. The tribe screamed as a wave crashed over the man, swallowing him in white foam. But as the water receded, he was still standing, holding tightly to the floating wood. He took a deep, trembling breath, filling his lungs with the sharp, salty air. This was the moment that would forever alter the trajectory of the human species. He lifted his right leg and placed his bare foot onto the slippery, wet bark. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird desperate to escape. He shifted his weight, pulling his other leg off the safety of the submerged sand. For a terrifying second, his balance faltered, and the horizon tilted wildly. The log rolled beneath him, a chaotic dance on the surface of the restless deep. He dropped to his stomach, wrapping his arms and legs around the thick trunk. The cold ocean sprayed his face, blinding him with stinging, salty tears. He clung to the wood with the desperation of a child clinging to its mother. The tribe watched in stunned silence as the current caught the massive log. Slowly, relentlessly, he was pulled away from the shoreline and out into the void. The space between him and the solid earth grew wider with every passing second. He looked back at his people, their figures shrinking against the backdrop of the forest. He had severed the invisible umbilical cord that tied humanity to the dry land. He was no longer a terrestrial creature, he was a voyager on the alien sea. Below him, the dark water stretched down into depths he could not even imagine. Shadows moved beneath the surface, ancient predators sensing a strange new presence. But the log held firm, cradling his fragile body above the lethal, freezing depths. He realized he was not falling, he was not drowning, he was surviving. A strange, exhilarating sense of triumph washed over his terror-stricken mind. He had conquered the impossible barrier, he was walking on the back of the monster. The impossible had become possible, reshaping the destiny of our entire species. This single, terrifying act of defiance unlocked the entire globe for our ancestors. It was the birth of navigation, the genesis of every ship that would ever sail. From this crude, drifting log would come rafts, canoes, galleons, and submarines. The courage to leave the shore allowed humanity to discover new continents. It allowed us to spread across the oceans, conquering islands and remote lands. All of it started with one starving hunter who refused to accept the edge of the world. He drifted further out, the shore becoming a thin line on the distant horizon. He learned to shift his weight, to read the rhythm of the rising and falling waves. He used a broken branch to push against the current, steering his wooden island. The ocean was no longer a wall of death, but an endless, terrifying highway. The tribe on the beach watched until he was nothing but a speck in the distance. Their fear slowly transformed into a profound, earth-shattering realization. The water could be tamed, the abyss could be crossed, the world was infinitely larger. They began to look at the other fallen trees with new eyes, with desperate hope. The psychological barrier was shattered, replaced by the primal drive to explore. They would follow his path, stepping into the void to chase the setting sun. That first terrifying ride on a log was the spark of human maritime dominance. It proved that our greatest strength is not our teeth, our claws, or our speed. Our greatest strength is our absolute refusal to be contained by our environment. When nature built an impenetrable wall of water, we learned how to float. We took the dead trees of the forest and used them to conquer the mighty oceans. And that legacy of blind courage still echoes in every journey into the unknown.